Hey again. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about Module 8 and kind of get us caught up to this week and fill in some gaps from some of the questions that were shared this morning. So there was a lot of confusion and a lot of angst about the Module 8 Unit 1 Activity 2 assignment, which is the self-assessment of teaching. So here's the rubric. I usually don't like to share, just go through like the platform because it's so dense, but I'm just going to scroll while I'm talking and you can look a little bit at this. So yes, you are submitting for your assignment your baseline lesson, and your baseline is ideally using your lesson plan from standard 1. You're incorporating and looking for standard 1, and then you're evaluating yourself on all the standards in your self-assessment with this activity. But what I want you to think about is you don't have to say in this particular lesson that, am I including all of these standards in this one lesson? Think about it more holistically, like I explained in the VC and in the previous video. So think about this. The idea behind this activity is to get you thinking critically about how you are already including these standards in your own teaching practice. So think of it in those terms. As you may look at that video that you submitted for your baseline, but you can think about your teaching practice in general and think, okay, well, here's the criteria, learner development. Rate yourself on how you are including this standard in your regular teaching practice. How are you including standard 2 learning differences? How do you differentiate for your students in general? And make them feel valued and create a climate of mutual respect, etc., etc. Okay? So try to think of it in those terms and go through each one of these criteria and rate yourself in a more holistic manner. Now, if you're all giving yourselves outstandings, then that's a problem because everybody has areas that they can grow. I've been teaching for 15 years and I would not give myself an outstanding on every single standard. But maybe in some I am rocking it out. Maybe I'm setting up this amazing learning environment because I've done research and I've done, professional development on how to create a learner-centered classroom, and so I know that I am just, knocking it out on this standard. But maybe I need to do a little bit more in terms of engaging my students. And for this part of standard 3, I might give myself a proficient or a basic. Try to think of it in those terms. The idea with this self-assessment is to get you more acclimated to the standards and to look holistically at your teaching and think about, how am I already including these standards in my practice, and thinking again about the idea of growth over clinical practice and thinking, this is my jumping off point. Now I kind of know where I'm starting from and the areas that I need to grow in and continue to learn more. I hope that helps. Okay, so now I'm going to give you an overview of standards 1 and 2 since we need to get caught up with our standards, and so this will give you a little bit of a deeper dive into each of these standards. So when I think about standard 1, learner development, I basically think about being developmentally appropriate, and I'm going to share some examples and break down this standard a little bit more for you. So think about cognitive development. It doesn't matter what grade level you're teaching. My examples here are from my dual language kindergarten class where I taught in a bilingual program and as a Spanish teacher. And so my example here is giving students the space to process and use their acquired skills in authentic situations. That really aids their cognitive development. And I have an example of a new student in my class from a few years ago who was coming in not midway, but in the beginning of the year after we had like maybe quarter two, and he had just moved from Brazil, and he was just completely overwhelmed in the classroom and found himself in a Spanish and English program, and he didn't speak either one. He didn't speak Spanish, he didn't speak English, he only spoke Portuguese. And so what I found were the students, since he didn't speak English, they were talking to him in English, and they were talking to him, and he was just getting shut down. And so what I did was I had the students break down where he was from in a whole group lesson. So we looked on a map and we said our new friend is from Brazil, and what language do they speak in Brazil? And actually Spanish and Portuguese have a lot of cognates and they're similar languages, so let's try to use all the Spanish we can to help the student understand and feel successful in the classroom. So that broke down the situation for the students and helped them with their cognitive development. And they were actually able to use, in my example I'm going to show you, they were able to use their math skills in an authentic situation in their learning centers, their math centers. So in this example of incorporating Standard 1, after we had done that activity in whole group of talking about where our new friend was from, I had a math lesson, and we created an anchor chart with some academic vocabulary. And when the students were in centers, I asked these two little girls to help their friend in Spanish to learn the names of the shapes. And you'll see that they start to do that. And neither one of these girls is a native Spanish speaker. But they used all the Spanish that they could, which is developing their content skills, and they're helping this student feel accepted and comfortable in the class. And you'll see them even referring to the wall, looking up at the wall to look at the anchor chart that we had created together in whole group. So let's watch this video real quick.
¿Y qué son las figuras geométricas? Enséñale. ¿Qué son?
Este es rombo, este es cuadrado, trapezoide, hexágono, rombo.
Excelente.
Y
Triángulo. Gracias por ser tan buenas amigas con Arthur, el nuevo amigo. Muy bien, chicas.
So you see that in that example, they were using all the Spanish that they could, and they were using it in an authentic situation. That is aiding in their cognitive development. So that's a demonstration of Standard 1 learner development. Another important criteria in Standard 1 is thinking about students' linguistic development. So my example that I want to share with you is from that same dual language program where we incorporated content and language objectives into our lessons. And so that helps the students be able to acquire the second language and navigate the immersion environment. And so how we did that was by including each of the language domains in their lessons and in our lesson objectives, And the language domains are listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And there's a +1 called making metalinguistic connections. And then another way that I would support their linguistic development is by front-loading vocabulary, providing sentence frames and lists for language learners, and allowing the students to strategically use their first language to acquire their second, which relates to the metalinguistic connections. So those are some examples of meeting standard 1 through a student's linguistic development and supporting that. Another criteria for standard 1 is meeting students' social and emotional development. And some ways that you can do that is through the types of practices you have to manage some student behavior and support students in their development of different social and emotional circumstances. So one of the things that we did at my previous school is we participated in restorative practices, which meant that if there were issues in the classroom, we would bring students together in a circle, and we implemented restorative justice, which meant that we would work to repair harm. And there's a lot of, I'm giving you a very quick overview of it, but basically that's what that means. I had a calm down corner in my classroom where students would go if they needed a break. I included a lot of brain breaks throughout the academic content lessons, particularly when I was teaching online during COVID. And then I included a lot of yoga and mindfulness to support their social emotional learning. So like when kids would come in from recess and they're kind of bringing in all the stuff that happened at recess, and instead of just jumping right into math content, I would have a few minutes to reset, and we would do some mindfulness activities or yoga, or just have some breathing exercises. And then my county included in their pedagogy some social emotional lessons that we adapted for our dual language program. So those are some examples of standard 1 learner development meeting their social and emotional needs. The other thing to keep in mind with standard 1 is your physical space. So obviously we probably don't have a lot of control on a lot of that, but this picture is at a school that I was at several years ago in Washington, D.C., where my classroom was dark, and I did not have a window out to the outdoors. The window was to the cafeteria, so I always had to have the blinds down, and there was really bad air ventilation and things like that. So I had to try to be creative to create the best situation that I could for my students, particularly when I had like 6th graders in there when I was teaching 6th grade Spanish. So I reconfigured my classroom to make it a cozier space. You see I have a sofa in there. I have more open space because it was too small for desks, so I had students sit in a circle on the floor. To improve the air quality, I brought in a fan. I propped the door open, things like that, and I used I took out a lot of stuff to make it seem bigger, because less was more in that classroom. So those are some examples of learner development in terms of the physical space and how I met that standard. Okay, so now I'm going to give you another brief overview of standard 2, learning differences. Normally we would spend obviously an entire VC on each of the standards, but I hope that this is helpful for you just to kind of get up to where we are next week, and we can take that deep dive. But I think that it's really important that you have at least some examples of the standards that you have not been able to address yet. Okay, so standard 2 is about learning differences and about differentiating for the classroom and for each of your students. So thinking about who the students are in front of you. How well do you know your students? And that's a really important part of starting the year and starting each class, is creating that relationship with students, because if you don't understand where the students are coming from or who they are, then you can't differentiate for them. And this is not just referring to their academic levels. This is meeting them in all aspects of their development, which is why Standard 1 lends itself to Standard 2. And you'll see that each of these standards kind of have a relationship to each other. And so if you understand the learner development from Standard 1, then going into Standard 2, you can get to know your students, understanding where they are in their development, and then meet their individual and unique needs, understanding their cultures and their communities, and including ensuring an inclusive learning environment. So I have some examples from my own classroom, again from my last 4 years in my kindergarten dual language classroom. So one of the criteria of Standard 2 learning differences is to provide scaffolds for the unique learning styles. So how do you do that? In this picture example, it's another math activity where with this example, I know we are all teaching different levels, different subjects, but it doesn't matter. I think the more we can share examples, the more you can adapt it to your own teaching. So in this example, which is for kindergarten Spanish math, this student is at a math center, and they're all playing the same game, but they might have different instructions based on their learning styles or based on their learning needs. And so that's really important. You can have, you may have a row of desks, especially right now with COVID. How do you meet students' individual needs and provide scaffolds when they're all in traditional rows of desks? And you have to be creative you can give them all the same material, but you can have them do different things with it, is basically my very quick explanation of providing scaffolds. Another important criteria for Standard 2 is understanding diverse cultures. And I think that comes down to creating empathy in the classroom and checking your own bias at the door. An amazing book that you may or may not be familiar with is this one here, Culturally Sustaining Pedagogies, Teaching and Learning for Justice in a Changing World. I highly, highly recommend it. I'll put a link to it in the Google Classroom as well. But understanding where your students come from and their unique culture is critical to understanding their learning needs and how to meet their unique learning differences. And then another criteria is to create inclusive learning environments that enable each student to meet the high standards. So one way to do that is by modifying your curriculum to meet the students' needs, which means to meet them where they are. So you may be implementing a curriculum, and at least in my case at my last school, the curriculum was not very developmentally appropriate. So we had to do a lot of modifying with my grade level team, and when we went to look at our curriculum, we would say, okay, for this particular student, how do we adapt some of this content to meet the student's needs and still keep them moving along on the continuum and holding them to high standards. So in this case, this picture is a picture of my student David, who was from China and was also found himself in a Spanish and English dual language kindergarten program, and he cried and cried and cried and cried and cried for the first couple of weeks. He was just completely overwhelmed. And how we were able to modify the curriculum and actually make it accessible for him was, you see, we were working on letters and helping him to express himself through art. So learning, in this case, he was learning uppercase and lowercase R in Spanish. And so he really enjoyed being able to work on that skill through painting. And some of the other students at this point were already writing some syllables or writing whole words, but he was still just practicing the letter. And so the way that we modified was continuing to model upper and lower case. I'm not sure at this point, this was a few years ago, but I'm not sure at this point if he really understood the letter or could recognize and identify the letter R, but he was recognizing the capital and lowercase, and that was modifying the curriculum to meet the students' needs. So the more we were able to support him with that and continue to allow him the practice instead of pushing him along with, everybody doing the same exact thing, we were able to help him to understand the one skill of upper and lowercase, and then he started to recognize the letters. So we were modifying the curriculum to meet his needs. The other criteria for Standard 2 is to create a positive classroom climate. So that one way to meet that standard is by thinking about the routines and the structures for your class. How are you promoting a sense of community with your students and creating student buy-in? In a dual language kindergarten classroom, that is not an easy thing to accomplish because, at least in my particular case, half of my students were coming from a home where they spoke in Spanish, but they had never been exposed to any academic content. So, their idea of school was English. So even though they were speaking Spanish at home, they didn't know their letters, their alphabet, their numbers, and basic colors, even in their first language of Spanish. So that was a hurdle that we had to overcome and help them feel comfortable being in a classroom where they needed to have confidence. And then the other half of my class could have been from anywhere, lots of different immigrant families from different parts of the world, and then some that, so they have spoken other languages other than English, or some that spoke English and not Spanish. So creating community and creating a sense of safety for these students was really, really critical in the beginning of the year so that I could promote a positive classroom environment. And one of the ways I did that was through morning meeting, where we sat in a circle every morning, and maybe I would front load some vocabulary they were going to need throughout the day, or maybe addressing some of their social emotional needs, or just having some fun in the beginning of the day. And that really set the tone to help promote community, and students felt invested and valued in the classroom. So that's another example of Standard 2. Okay, so here is the assignment that you have for this week for Unit 2 that we didn't get to talk about today in the VC. So for Activity 1, you are going to go in and rate some videos and provide feedback on the videos. The idea around this activity is that you're gaining experience on what giving feedback is like, because you will be giving each other feedback down the road in clinical. So this is also exposing you to that and just seeing other lesson examples. You're going to be annotating the videos and scoring them using the Teach Now rubric, the In-Task Standards rubric, and thinking about Standards 1 and 2. Okay? And then at the end, you're going to write a reflection on the process of evaluating and giving feedback, and then post it to the discussion forum. So I'm going to explain now a little bit more about the case study. We didn't go over it at all in the VC, but we are going to be continuing the case studies, and I will create a spreadsheet for you in Google Classroom with the dates that you're already signed up for the case studies. I may have to modify a little bit because we're already a little bit behind, but you are going to present a case study at some point in Module 8. You already signed up for that with your previous instructor, so I'm going to try to keep that same schedule. And make sure, I'm not sure if this was explained to you before, but your presentation should be around 10 minutes in length. So as far as I'm concerned, you do not have to record it and post it 2 days prior. That is really so that you stay on track with your assignments and don't get behind. But I'm okay with it if you have it. Just don't come to the VC and not be prepared to present it. I kind of like to be surprised by the case studies because I love the discussions that come out of it. So don't feel like you have to submit it 2 days prior. That's okay with me. But now just start thinking about a student that you could do a case study on. This is an example. This picture here is of a little guy that I actually did a real case study on in my job at a previous school because he was having a lot of issues and he was actually kicking me. Hated school, and it turns out that he had a very serious hearing loss. And so, just being able to really hone in on this student and talk with other teachers and, take a deep dive into what was going on with the student, we were able to suggest to his parents that he get tested. And it turns out that he had hearing loss. And then he got hearing aids and he got some speech therapy and he was on his way. And here is an activity that we were doing together after to kind of like repair some of that angst that he had towards me because he was feeling a lot more confident. So that's the idea with the case study. Try to choose a student that you could focus in on and feel more that you could share with the group about something unique that's going on with the student. It doesn't have to be a student that's having, a negative issue. It could be a student that needs an extra support, like a gifted and talented, program or something like that, some type of unique scaffolding. It really can be whatever you want it to be. Okay, so that is the wrap-up for Standards 1 and 2, and I hope that it was helpful. And next week we should be good to go and resume our clinical practice. And this is my info. If you need to get in touch with me, just send me a quick email, and I'm happy to help.